Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. Right, so we are closing into the top of class top 10 rankings. I do these twice a year, once in June, once in December. And we already have done Skill, Mystic, Tech, Mutant top 10 rankings alongside 2020, 2023 champions and 2022 champions. Now we're left with Science and Cosmic. And Science Class top 10 video is the hardest one to make because Science Class has the largest amount of really good champions. Only reason Cosmic really kind of edged it out because Cosmic has some stupid champions up top and then it kind of falls off. With Science, that is not the case. You can quite literally debate starting spot number 6 to 20. There are like 10 champions or 8 champions that I really wanted to fit in this list, but I just couldn't because there are so many great ones. Therefore, I know that I will get many comments asking, like, where's this champion? Why is that not included? But keep in mind that these lists are always a mixture of my own personal opinions and preferences alongside with current game relevance and trends. I do take a look at how champions do in general questing, in Alliance Wars, in Battlegrounds, mix it all together and try to post these as a representation of my view of the game currently. That said, before we go any further, do not forget that you can win $100 for July 4th deals. We are organizing $300 giveaway thanks to Evizone, and it's super easy to enter. Just go in the game, Duel my account, and then post the screenshot in the link that you will find in the video description below. And as soon as you do, that's it, you're entered, and then you have until July 2nd to do so. Results will be posted on July 4th, and there will be 3 $100 winners. So this is how the list used to look like, and all of those champions are still really good and useful. And we get more because we have new champions released, some champions buffed, some champions that are, gaining their ground, and so on and so forth. There are so many good science champions, which I absolutely love. So let's jump to Aunt May and give some honorable mentions because there will be a lot of them. This time around, I will not be including Immortal Abomination in the top 10 list, but again, you could make an argument that he should be there because he's great offensively, he can trap people defensively, he's great for questing, sustainability, easy to play, lots of very good qualities. Can't deny that I have been seeing significantly less of him overall, whether in Battlegrounds or in Alliance War, and people just kind of have slightly moved away from him, but without doubt, I think there are a lot of people who still absolutely love that character. Similar thing to Anti-Venom. Anti-Venom is one of my favorite science champions. I do have the guy at rank 4, SIG 200. I use him plenty, and he's awesome. He's not necessarily the fastest, but he's super reliable, super useful, tons of utility, and I love the guy also because he has Incinerate immunity, just making him one of the best Mephisto counters. And obviously with Poison immunity, he's great for hazard shift lanes. Awesome champion. Easily could make an argument for top 10 spot as well. Moving on, we have an oldie but goldie, Captain America Infinity War. Still very powerful champion. Doesn't quite make the cut. And on top of it all, we have Joe Fixit, which I think a lot of communities slept for a very long time. And there is a very solid argument to placing him in the top 10 because he does have access to a ton of damage, ton of bleed, disorients, weaknesses, petrifies. He has like most, if not all, the science champion staples pretty much in his kit, alongside poison immunity, and yeah, he's very effective. Then another champion that I really would have liked to add is Overseer. Overseer is also very powerful champion, immune to Nullify, has tons of burst damage, access to Taunt, access to ability accuracy reduction on opponent's special attacks, immunity to poison. Very solid champ. And another old but gold, Void is somewhat making a bit of a comeback. I have been seeing him here and there much more recently than I have been, let's say, a year or year and a half ago. So it's very good to know that Void is still doing extremely well. Obviously, there are upsides and downsides to all of these champions. If they wouldn't have any downsides, they would be in top 10. And, the same goes for Void, whether that is speed or the fact that he's somewhat RNG reliant at times, but still very powerful champion. But we need to start with our top 10. And in the 10th spot, I'm going to be putting in Quicksilver. I don't think Quicksilver is the top 5 science champion. I think primarily we do see him used largely as a defender, whether it be that Alliance or in Battlegrounds, and that is the reason why he does have a presence. Obviously, in Alliance War, we do see him now and then used defensively as well, but definitely not all that much. And again, in questing situations, he was quite cool for 8.2, I'll fully admit to that. But in 9 times out of 10, you'll just pick up somebody that is quicker or easier to use. Now, facts remain that he is one of the most ability-stacked science champions with ability to deal with evades, unstoppable, miss mechanics, ability to deal with power gain. He doesn't gain buffs even from dexterity. Has access to trauma and bursts of damage. There's quite a lot to like, obviously. Extended evade window to help you dex specials you otherwise couldn't. And there's just a lot of abilities, but as we talked before, a ton of abilities does not necessarily mean that the champion is really, really good. Because otherwise we would have like Jubilees and Psychomans at their respective class top lists and a ton of other examples of the sort. It's how effective, how fast, how powerful these champions are. And Quicksilver is kind of a compromise in that department. He's quite an annoying defender, but offensively you will often take a compromise in either the ease of use or the speed or some other area. At the same time, definitely a very, very good champion. Much, much, much more than just a prestige rank up. And who knows? With time, his stock might go up, might remain the same. We'll see. Now, in spot number 9, a lot of people will disagree, and this is also one of the reasons why I said, like, the bottom 2 spots, in my opinion, can be debated between all of these honorable mentions and Quicksilver and the champion that I placed in spot number 9 at the moment. That is Hulk. And Hulk is a very straightforward champion in the sense that he does not have as much utility as, let's say, Overseer does, or Anti-Venom, or Eye-Bomb. What he does have is a ton of damage. Now, there are some glimpses of utility, obviously, with the synergy with ton of debuffs. Thus, benefits from Inequity Mastery, benefits from Despair, stuff like that. But in general, he's a poison immune beatstick. Goes in the fight and nukes stuff down. The reason that puts the thing that does put Hulk above a lot of the other champions, in my opinion, is that stun loop, is that stun chain. Because once you drop that level 2, you have a ton of time to get in damage, and then you can drop another level 1, and then another level 1, and you effectively can blitz down opponents' health pools, ignoring nodes, ignoring abilities, ignoring power bar, if you have enough damage. And he does. So at the moment, we are definitely seeing Hulk tear through the contest. Obviously, also Hulk being in the initial 7-star pool definitely has helped his popularity a ton. Because he did get buffed, and some people were starting to use Hulk because of his speed and damage, but it wasn't nowhere near as popular. Now that he's a 7-star, a lot more people have used Hulk, a lot more people have gotten crushed because of Hulk, and therefore they want to get Hulk or want to rank up Hulk, and we see him used more and more elsewhere. Ultimately, being just a nuke or largely nukey type of champion, in many of the other classes might not necessarily be that big of a deal. But in case of Hulk, it kind of is, because there is this idea about science class not being fast and not having nukes. And just like Juggernaut's arrival alongside with like Tigra and Chavez buff has helped Mystic class tremendously as a whole, because they have gained this, out of the gate damage and speed. Hulk's arrival and Spot's arrival helped tremendously in the science class, because a class that typically isn't considered to be as fast when it comes to more open field nuke metas or nodes or purposes, Hulk is pushing back against that. And I think for a science class, it does matter a lot. And that is why we see as many people value Hulk as highly, myself included. Right. So that's Hulk. Fairly simple. Obviously, he does have some other stuff built in, like physical and critical resistance, access to unstoppables, um, degeneration resistance. There are bits, but let's face it, Hulk's all about passive furies, stun lock, and ton of damage. Right, let's move on to spot number 8. And 6 months ago, a large portion of my subscribers pretty much threw a hissy fit when I ranked up Spider-Ham as highly as I did. And I still stick by it. I'm putting him in exactly the same position as I did 6 months ago. And if you think about it, that's effectively almost like a promotion because we have had other champions who have rise to top, some new additions there. And him being able to maintain spot number 8 just means that he has been doing what he did before. We are seeing much more of him virtually everywhere. He's staple Alliance War Defender. He is a staple questing champion for a ton of people. And he is a staple Battlegrounds player, especially towards the higher tiers of the brackets, because out of all of the Power Sting champions, he's the more potent one. On top of it, obviously, ability to mitigate degen damage or special attack damage, ability to access taunt consistently and that guaranteed evade, which you can use to mitigate any special attack block damage. It's just tremendously useful for him. And he does have higher initial damage for sure than somebody like, Cassie Langwood and stuff like that. And it is tremendously helpful that allows him to destroy not only large Mystic champions, but a ton of different opponents. And obviously, he can always pose a threat on defense as well. And yeah, if you want to have a go at me, you can have a go at me yet again for ranking Spider-Ham as highly. But I do believe that more and more people are coming around the fact that Spider-Ham is very potent champion that is getting catalyst, that is getting attention. I have seen rank 5 Spider-Hams running around. I see a ton of rank 4 Spider-Hams. Spider-Ham is on my short-term rank up list as well. And I do think he's very powerful. That's why putting him in spot number 8. Right. Now, a champion that debuted relatively quietly, soon after started to gain popularity, and now is just carrying on that trend, and that's Titania. Titania previously was in spot number 9, and now she has moved up 2 spots to spot number 7, and there's a good reason for it. Because she is, in my opinion, one of the best buff immune champions in the game, but also the kind of more straightforward buff immune champion in the game. And she is, again, getting placements on Alliance War, getting attack and defense. Defense maybe not as much, but definitely on attack. She's being used in Battlegrounds as a very chunky stall type of defender at times, but primarily as a very solid and reliable science champion to nuke down opponents. Ability not to gain buffs lets her bypass a ton of abilities and nodes and Mystic Dispersion and whatnot. And obviously, the entire game plan with Titania pretty much appears to be get to level 3, nuke down with heavy attack spam. And it works tremendously well because she reduces opponents' combat power rate, therefore she can be more aggressive than normal champions, therefore she gets to that level 3 quicker as well. And obviously, Titania has had some amazing interactions in story content that has been released. She can be useful in challenge type of situations also. And some of the cooler things about Titania is that, unlike vast majority of the science champions, she actually kind of takes her debuff being shrugged off very well, because the damage comes largely from her fury buffs. And you still get your furies as long as you drop your debuffs. Doesn't matter whether they get purified or not. So if you haven't tried it already, try using Titania against Kingpin or Moleman or something like that, and she'll surprise you because she's still very potent against matchups where most science champions wouldn't be, which is the reason why I do value her as highly as well. You can take a lot of weird fights because it doesn't matter what happens to those debuffs, whether they stack and stuff like that. It just matters how many of those debuffs you have applied, thus getting the furies. So one of the coolest things I do like about Titania, which lets her be one of the heaviest cheese potential champions, is whenever the opponent is inflicted with a debuff, Titania gains a fury passive, increasing her attack rating by 800. But keep in mind, this doesn't specify her debuffs or what debuffs, so she does have a crazy interaction with some of the nodes where any debuffs give her the furies. So if there aren't any nodes that inflict additional debuffs on the opponent, well, you're in luck because she's going to be gaining a ton of extra furies. So keep that in mind. Anyways, moving on to spot number 6. And in spot number 6, at the moment, I will be placing Mr. Negative. And he's still tremendously effective in Alliance War, in questing, in battlegrounds, primarily as an offensive champion. In questing, as a quest opponent, he can be quite annoying as a defender, but we don't really put that much value to it. But in general, he's primarily an offensive champion, because once you learn how to deal with him, he's not that complicated. But that being said, he is also one of the more potent science champions in the sense that he does have a ton of cool tricks up his sleeve. That level 2 nuke potential interacts extremely well with any damage multipliers on his special attacks, and that has been, evident in a ton of metas and nodes and stuff like that. Obviously, ability to safely and guaranteed intercept and auto wait is also not to be ignored, and it is very helpful with more and more of these must intercept nodes being present. Top of it, nullify immune, can deal with degen and actually heal from degeneration. And one of the cooler things that I like about Mr. Negative is that he does well against a lot of matchups most science champions wouldn't necessarily do as well. Like, for instance, he's a very solid thing counter and so on and so forth, because he does okayish damage on his base, but most of the stuff comes from his level 2 degen. And if you do that rotation properly, it's typically enough to take down pretty much anyone. Obviously, access to incredibly potent Petrify make him a great regeneration node counter and extra power gain counter. What else there is to say? Very, very solid champion. You could definitely make an argument for him perhaps placing a couple spots higher as well, because I do know for a fact that we have some insanely skilled Mr. Negative players in the game. My personal party trick with Mr. Negative that I do enjoy the most when the situation arises for is the fact that you can get to your level 2 before opponent has a chance to use their level 1, which you typically do by landing like 4 parries, not hitting the opponent at all, getting your debuff on the opponent, and reducing their combat power rate, and then just smacking them super actively, and then basically rinse and repeat, and then drop your level 2. Super awesome kind of like interaction that can save your skin against some trickier opponents and trickier node combinations. Definitely also quite high skill cap. One of the more annoying things about Mr. Negative, though, is that he is not the tankiest Chad in the block. And with his parry reliant playstyle and 7 stars coming out, amount of block damage he is taking, unfortunately, unless you are willing to extend the fight and go for level 1, it is quite bad. And that kind of sucks. That's the biggest downside, I think, of him, especially considering now that remaining health is going to be more important in battlegrounds, especially considering the fact that we kind of have a very similar alternative that deals with block damage better. There are, again, inherent downsides to virtually any champion. Mr. Negative is no exception, but he's still an absolute powerhouse in my opinion, and also potentially the coolest looking champion in the game. Just saying. For number 5 at the moment, and this might be... Nah, I think it's fine. For number 5, I'm going to give it to Cassie. Now, obviously, Cassie still has problems with... She's technically bugged and her talent is more powerful, but if you are running an appropriate mastery setup, it's going to be exactly as big damage reduction as she currently has if you do have max inequity. And then on top of it, obviously, there are the whiffing problems, which occasionally do ruin a fight or two, which I hope Kabam addresses very, very soon. But from every single point, Cassie is one of those champions that has definitely proved herself across the game. One of the more successful champions this year, at least so far. And what makes her so good? Well, number 1 is obviously she's also a buff immune champion, but unlike Titania, she also has the immunities. If she's awakened, immunity to power steal, on top of immunity to buffs, on top of immunity to shock and poison. And those are more important than a lot of people realize, allowing her to take a ton more nodes or matchups than she otherwise couldn't. She has access to poison, which can be extremely useful in situations, but doesn't rely on it, or it's not an absolute must-have type of situation for her. I love the fact that, obviously, Cassie is a bit of a build-up champion, but that build-up kind of remains and is relatively easy to sustain with having up to 40 power stings an opponent that get refreshed at all times. She does have access to solid hit damage via her level 2s as well, especially if you have gotten more comfortable playing with Cassie, gaining the pin particles and dropping those poisons, pausing your taunt. You can easily drop a level 2 there very quickly. Obviously, she does also have bigger defensive value than a lot of people realize. Not necessarily for Alliance War, but definitely for Battlegrounds as a defender, because number one, she's quite tanky. Number two, there's still that evade that goes up to 9% chance. And she also has the level 1 that you absolutely do not want her to throw, just like Bishop, basically, where she will place 12, no, or 14 debuffs, and you will probably take some detonation from those. And ultimately, yeah, I think Cassie is a very, very well-balanced, solid champion that does take a bit of practice to use. A little hint here would be that she's much more similar to use to Tiger than most people realize, to a point where you want to be able to dash in the middle of opponent's special attacks to position yourself closer, to charge your heavy, to phase those openings, which is another thing that I didn't even mention. Obviously, heavy attack being the core of Cassie's kit, and with that, you do need to be careful when you use it, but it is extremely powerful, allowing you to extend your combos, getting extra openings, saving you from unblockable specials, so on and so forth. Can be tremendously powerful ability, similar to Titania's Haymakers. But yeah, here we are, and at the moment I am putting Cassie at spot number 5. Maybe, I fully admit that I am being somewhat overly enthusiastic about it, but I do have quite high hopes and expectations of this character, as well as quite high impression of what she has been able to do in the game already. But here we go. And now I do think we have a solid top 4 of champions that do kind of stand a bit higher than others. Number 1 is going to be Mr. Fantastic. And this is yet again one of those situations where I have been singing his praises for like 2.5 years now. And every time I mention him in a video, there's something, Mr. Fantastic sucks. And then every other stream, I have somebody who pops in and says like, wow, you were so right about Mr. Fantastic. I ranked him up, zero regrets. He is one of the best champions I have ranked up, or something like that. Because I believe most of the people who don't like Mr. Fantastic are the people who have never ranked him up properly. Fact of the matter is that Mr. Fantastic is one of the best control characters in the game, with zero RNG involved, extremely tanky. There's tons of abilities that just make him work in incredible situations, and his damage is better than most people realize. Alright, so what's so good about Mr. Fantastic? Obviously, before we talk about him himself, there are amazing synergies and amazing pre-fight abilities that are a staple in Alliance War and often can save your skin in questing. For instance, he can make virtually any champion a good Dr. Doom counter in a quest by activating your Petrify pre-fight, so on and so forth. So those are great. But let's take a look at him as a champion himself. So you basically start the fight with 3 debuffs, which again is more than most champions would, because all 3 of these debuffs are very potent and are very useful and are there from the very beginning of the fight. So inflict Petrify 40% potency, significantly reducing any effect power gain and regeneration. Suppress the opponent, decreasing their combat power rate, letting you be more aggressive. And making debuff Siphoner, increasing potency of your damage over time debuffs, and reducing the potency of their damage over time debuffs, which is the most important part in case of Mr. Fantastic. So, from the very start of the fight, very first second, if you have maxed out Despair, which you should, this would be 55, 60, 75% regen rate reduction. No, wait. Yeah, 75%. So, since opponent throws a special attack, they get a debuff that turns into a 90% regen rate reduction, and when you parry, stun, or anything else, you're already completely reversing regen. So, as soon as you throw your first level 2, you have 80% Petrify, almost nullifying all opponents' effect power gain. You decrease their combat power rate by half, which is massive, and you also reduce the effectiveness of their damage over time effects by half, which is also already quite huge, considering his resistances, especially, and the fact that you can recover large bits of those with willpower. At that point, you're already properly reversing opponent's regeneration rate because of the spare mastery. You'd have 80% petrify, plus you'd be getting 30% from despair, plus any other debuffs that they have. And obviously, once you throw your second special, you're completely set up, and your opponent is complete noodle. Whilst all of that is happening, opponent's damage output is absolutely destroyed because of, number one, inequity mastery. And then also, if you are placing taunt on the opponent, then that obviously, I think this is a mistake here, can be 0.4%, but still, taunt reduces their attack as well as you get your resistances, like you're up higher, and you get your evade chance, because physical and energy resistance is increased by almost 1k, which is quite solid. You have very high evade chance, saving you from a ton of damage, and you obviously keep building up your attack. And then the further the fight progresses, the quicker you gain your combat power rate, the more spammy you get, and it's just incredible. On top of it all, he's also kind of a defensive nightmare, because unless you have a very dedicated counter, it's a very bad idea to use special attacks against him, because they will be doing very little damage and will make him into an evade machine, great for stalling time. Overall, Mr. Fantastic is not at the same level, but subscribes to the same idea, kind of like Kingpin. But he just put in work. He's a staple Alliance War attacker, super safe, staple Alliance War defender. Unless Kabam does stupid nuke meta shit like they did in this season or last couple of seasons. Staple Battlegrounds champion offensively and defensively. And he's definitely one of the most valuable, versatile, and applicable questing champions in the entire game. Because he brings in a tremendous value with his synergies in your questing teams, with his pre-fights, and with his own build. He really, really, really is that good. I have a feeling that I'm going to have to try and convince people about this, and for as long as I am going to be playing this game, because he doesn't have big red numbers, or he doesn't have big yellow numbers, but his damage output even is not all that bad either, especially in kind of medium to longer level fights. But even in relatively brief fights, he still does decently enough. So, take it for what you will, but Mr. Fantastic is an absolute chad, and it's time you put some respect on his. Right, spot number 3 goes to, well, Spot. And Spot definitely has gained a ton of popularity, largely because he was the first actual proper science nuke in the game, and that is also the best way to describe him, because that is primarily focus of him. A ton of burst damage. The trick that people use in order to benefit from the SIG ability has increased his damage output tremendously. If you do want to know more about that, you will have to check out my Spot guide. And other than that, he doesn't have the most stuff going on for him, but the fact that he can have tremendously long duration of the untouchable actually lets him counter a lot of things many people don't think about at first. What kind of things am I talking about? For instance, Spot is relatively solid against Unstoppable, and I'm sure you can see it in the next Battleground season. Because whilst you're untouchable, you can just keep spamming your light attacks, you're going to keep pausing it, opponent's going to try and hit you, he's going to miss, so he's going to get rupture damage, and you're just going to do your thing, and you're not going to care that they are unstoppable. Similar thing goes to evade or miss, because you can just still spamming your hits, opponent's going to keep missing you, and you can still clap them whenever you do land them. And that is tremendously useful. Obviously, with level 1, he also has effectively access to a moderate amount of regeneration, which can be tremendously helpful, as well as, well, the regeneration is happening via buff immunity debuff that he places on himself, which means he can also go buff immune. It is nowhere near as powerful as actual buff immunity, but the fact that it is debuff does let him regen solid amount. And then, other than that, it's all about the level 2 nuke. It's not a super complex character. It is a character that unfortunately sometimes gets screwed over by AI that refuses to smack your block. And the biggest downside of using Spot is the fact that in virtually any fight, you will end up taking block damage. But his overall damage output and obviously his tankiness after the first portal block typically does make up for it indeed. Right, all that being said, it will be interesting to see where Spot goes from this point forward. I do not see Spot going any higher than this. If anything, I see Spot losing a bit of ground. And reasons for that are twofold, primarily. One, 7 stars typically get placed on defense with block penetration stat, and that can be quite hurtful. There are some relics that help him mitigate that, and there are some matchups where it doesn't matter too much. But as more and more 7 stars do get released in game, then just as a generic point of view, 7 stars for most part will have increased block penetration, which is not great news for Spot, because he's going to be taking more damage. The second thing that actually is very, very brand new that is going to hinder Spot somewhat is the fact that in Battlegrounds now, remaining health will matter more than the overall speed of the fight. So currently in Battlegrounds, it was very much so worth taking 8 or 9% of your health as block damage if you could finish fight in 40 seconds. In the new set of Battlegrounds, if you can take 1 or 2% of your max health as block damage or chip damage, but finish your fight in 60 seconds, likely is going to be the more important thing. So he might, we'll see how that works out. But it is definitely something to keep. That said, who knows? Maybe he's going to be powerful enough to stand through it all regardless. And it's going to be very, very interesting to see. But even if he deals with all of those problems as well as possible, there is no way at the moment, I believe, that top 2 science champions get dethroned. Because top 2 science champions are just head and shoulders above rest. They just are. If I'm perfectly willing to debate Spot's number, I don't know, 9 to 20, perfectly willing to debate Spot's number 3 or 4 to like 7 or 8, something like that, I am at all not willing to debate number 1 and number 2. Because I feel extremely strongly about it. I mean, I'm always willing to debate, but I feel very confident that I win every time. Anyways, second best science champion in the game, Scorpion. Scorpion is a perfect science champion that is reasonable. As in, Scorpion does pretty much everything you want science champion to do. He does it extremely well. He has a ton of flexibility, plenty of defensive value, and is very safe, tanky, and great to use. So let's break him quickly down. He has access to 3 different damage over time effects, which enables him not only to adjust himself to the opponents that you're going up against by picking your immunities and damage over time effect, or the type of typed damage that you're doing, but obviously it also unlocks a ton of nodes where a bleed or a poison or something is required. Not a bleed, but poison, rupture, or shock. So he has access to poison, rupture, and shock. And he also is immune to whichever 2 debuffs he is not using, so poison, rupture, or shock. The only rupture immune champion in the game, but on top of it, obviously has access to other immunities. And the coolest thing about Spot, for me, is the fact that the debuffs are very well chosen. If anything, I just wish they would have selected Cold Snap instead of Shock, but I kind of get why they didn't. Because we have Poison, that is direct damage, which means poison damage is not affected by physical resistance or energy resistance. It's direct damage, but it's also smaller for a reason, because, direct. Obviously, there are quite a lot of poison immune champions. In that case, you can pick one of the 2 following, which is Shock, which is classed as energy damage, which will interact with, some abilities that you will want to avoid, but at the same time will have time when you do extra damage because opponents have negative energy resistance, for instance. And the same thing goes for Rupture, because Rupture is physical damage, and it will interact with opponents' physical resistance, or if they have negative physical resistance, it will automatically do more damage. So that is super useful in itself. Obviously, the fact that he spams these debuffs synergize greatly with Despair and Inequity, making him even tankier and safer to use, and giving him bit of extra utility. And then moving on, he does have access to torments, which are more meaningful than a lot of people realize because you have access to a large amount of non-damaging debuffs, which is also something that often is specified in specific nodes or champion abilities. But he doesn't have to rely on them, which is perfect. Then the Scorpion Sense is his primarily defensive utility, but can save you offensively as well. And we need to talk about special ones and special twos. So access to potent taunt effect, super cool because he's a power. It's not a powers thing, but he's powers thingy type of character. Which is very useful to brute force out those special attacks from the opponent. And then level 2 has access to Petrify, reducing opponent's combat power rate, and the regeneration rate is also very, very useful. But if he's awakened, he can turn into one of the best healing science champions in the game. Kind of like Warlock turns into the best power control champions in a game, specifically for Alliance War and Battlegrounds, because the only thing for it to be awesome that's required is the willpower. And also, if opponent is suffering from taunt effect, he can block unblockable special attacks, which is a crazy good amount of utility. That being said, all that coupled with one of the best block proficiency stats in the game and very large amounts of damage, which people kind of underestimated initially if he's not synergized. But you can get very, very, very potent amount of damage out of him to the point where I have taken Rintra down in like 45 seconds with Scorpion. Typically, it's probably like 50 something. Right? So it's very, very fast. And that's unsynergized. And then obviously there is the questing part of Scorpion, which is also no less impressive, if anything, even more so. Because if you do have Agent Venom or Venom synergy with him, for each of your Sting debuffs that you place on opponent, you gain like quite potent Fury. And his damage effectively skyrockets because that also affects his Sting damage. And then you can just run through stuff with Scorpion like nobody's business. And he turns into one of the highest damage output champions in a game. Definitely somewhere in top 20. Like people have dropped like 1 million burst damage with Scorpion. Right. So what I think about Scorpion is that he is about as good of a science champion as you can make without breaking the game. And by breaking the game, I effectively mean designing a champion that you would have to keep in mind and in forefront whenever designing any new piece of content. By breaking the game, I mean champions like Nimrod, Ghost, Quake, Human Torch. The champions that have wreaked havoc across the contest, and that right now you can guarantee yourself when somebody is working on the new Abyss, there is a short list of champions that they are making absolutely sure do not run wild in it. That includes Hercules, that includes Human Torch, that includes Ghost, that includes, used to include Quake, I'm not so sure anymore, but still. Well, to prevent Quake, you just need big enough health pool these days, is what I'm trying to say. Anyways, but you guys know what I mean. There are these champions that just wreck the game, and they do. Whether it's a good or a bad thing, and Archangel's probably up there as well. But whether that's a good or a bad thing, we can debate about it. But it is something that we need to acknowledge. Whenever Kabam devs are designing 8.3 and 4, they are definitely going through a checklist. Can this be cheesed with Ronan, Torch, Ghost, and so on and so forth? Scorpion, I don't think is that. Scorpion is just as high as you can reach without basically getting him on all sorts of Kabam hit lists. I think Scorpion's about as good of a champion as you make that still comes across balanced. Because there are plenty of science champions that do similar things to a degree, maybe not just as effective, maybe not just as many in a single package, but, nothing that breaks the mold completely, like the champions them. So that's why I think that Scorpion is going to remain the second best champion in the game. In the science class. Because he is the pinnacle that you can do without busting the game wide open. And now with balancing program, just don't think we're going to get another one like that. I don't think we're going to get another Torch. I don't think we're going to get another Hercules or Ghost or something. because Kabam's gonna snuff that shit out. And that is absolutely evident with how they nuke down Baron Zemo. Even though he doesn't have as many kind of like cheesy interactions, there are situations when Baron Zemo turns into a cheese cheat code. And they took that away from him in almost all situations. And if there's something that's gonna come that's stronger than Scorpion, come on, sure shit gonna take it away. That being said, we definitely need to address the spot number one, which is the science champion that has broken the mold and that has managed to land himself on all sorts of hit lists, that has Kabam devs saying that in Battlegrounds his pre-fight ability shouldn't work, or, you know, you have this and that and that and that. And he's definitely a champion that is at top of Kabam's like most wanted hit list or something like that. And he's a champion that Kabam devs are keeping in mind whenever they are designing new piece of content. How powerful he is, to a point where, as I believe 6-star rank 2 and Awakened champion when I was initially doing Abyss, he was the only champion out of all of the initially champs used at a low rating that could consistently solo his fights. Because his damage output turned out that ridiculous. And Human Torch is the dominant science champion, and I don't think anybody who understands the game can say otherwise because of the things that I just said. Yeah, you might like some other champions more, you might even use some other champions more, but Human Torch is the top dog in the class. Because he's one of the most banned champions in Alliance Wars. He is one of the most banned champions in Battlegrounds. He's definitely one of the most versatile, most used nukes in most of the metas, because he nukes not only the entire Mystic class, but you know, your Nimrods and all other energy-based champions. And then he does perfectly fine against random stuff like Korg. Like, on equal rank footing, Human Torch does Korg in like 60 seconds. That's not slower than most champions that people call Korg counters. He is that good. But even in a, you know, relatively moderate situation, he's still quite solid. And then when there is energy damage involved and you can start building up his smolders, just a Terminator. That whenever you do face down a Human Torch, you either accept that you have lost a round, or your defender's gonna get nuked down, or, you know, you're just screwed. Or whenever you have a Human Torch, you just take it as a guaranteed win. Be that Act 7 or 8 boss, be that Alliance War fight, or be that Battlegrounds fight. Super easy to use, super high damage output with not infinite ramp up. Well, not infinite, but, you know, insane damage ceiling when you get him to like 100 smolders in longer fights, if you manage to do so. And obviously ability to reverse the regen is still plenty useful, even though he can damage it. Access to passive powers things, and potentially most importantly, no flames, which all of one champion in game is immune to. Yeah, I agree. Scorpion has more abilities. Quicksilver has more abilities. Does anybody really think that Quicksilver is better than Scorpion and Human Torch? I don't think so. At least they shouldn't. Do they're wrong. But it's just yet another kind of nail in the coffin of having shit ton of abilities is what's necessary to make a great champion. No, Human Torch doesn't have shit ton of abilities. He doesn't, you know, have access to slow or petrify, something like that. But he doesn't need that because he just nukes shit down. And here we are. Human Torch is one of the, I'd say, 10 or under 10 champions that Kabam has ever released that does break the game, to a point where they do need to be kept in mind whenever any new champion gets released or designed. And when it comes to Mystic class, you know, or many of the other classes, Kabam has pretty much given up on, you know, torch-proofing most of the champions. They realized they'd probably be fighting a losing battle there. Therefore, they didn't even really try torch-proof, you know, because Kabam did domino-proof certain tech champions, you know, and at the same time, they also Magneto-proofed certain tech champions. And then Kabam Mystic-proofed Galen. And Kabam is very much so in the counter of a counter type of thing. We can't pretty much seen any attempt to rain in down torch because it's pretty much pointless. Only argument that Iceman has no flame immunity is like, wow, yeah, cool, okay. As if Iceman is any dominant champion in the game after his buff anyway. But yeah, the best science champion. Period. So that means I can reveal the list yet again. We can compare side by side. Thing is also another champion that is still amazingly useful in the game, but I do think he has taken some step back because we get more and more counters, and his offensive uses have also decreased in my opinion. So still a very great champion, just not as good. Anyways, Human Torch remains spot number 1. Spot number 2 remains Scorpion. Mr. Fantastic does get a downgrade from 3 to 4. Spot gets a jump from 6 to 3. Mr. Negative gets a downgrade from 4 to 6. Cassie Lang is a new addition. Quicksilver moves from 5th spot to 10th. In my opinion, I-Bomb does not appear on this list anymore. Spider-Ham retains his position. Titanium moved from 9th to 7th. And Thing is out of the list. Let me know what you guys think about the list. What would you change? And I will catch you guys later. Bye. Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information